For many of our friends and neighbors and people around the country, the history of America's war for independence is actually family history. And it's a source of great pride and honor for these families. And it qualifies them to join organizations like the Sons of the American Revolution or our sister organization, the Daughters of the American Revolution, and both of which serve to perpetuate the memories of those sacrifices from those patriots that secured the liberties that we still enjoy today. And tonight's guest, Dee Bradford, has that kind of family history in spades, and we want to welcome him to the show. Dee, welcome.
It's going to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
So
it's a real pleasure.
Yeah, man. So Dee is born and raised here in the Charlotte region in Mecklenburg County. Dee grew up on a dairy farm in the Huntersville, North Carolina area. And then, as I understand your history, the family converted over into land development work. And tell us about that. Tell us about that kind of transition in that family history.
Okay. What happened? My grandfather, like I said, where David and Mary came down from Pennsylvania and moved in this area, we're probably about 3 miles from where they first settled here in the 1760s.
So these are the original descendants that moved down from Pennsylvania down the Great Wagon Road. And about
Yes.
when was that, Dee?
In the 1760s. And James, who I got into the Sons of the American Revolution, was a young man at that time when they moved down to the Poplar Tent church area, which is in Concord, which was part of, Cabarrus County, but at that time was Mecklenburg and started out as Anson County. So if you go back far enough, they were actually settled in Anson County to begin with.
Okay.
Which I think is interesting. And then it became Mecklenburg, and then it became Cabarrus. So that makes it a little interesting about trying to trace everything back, because they were still in the same place, but they were in different counties. And,
Yeah.
But anyway,
and that original place that they moved to is not far from where you grew up on the farm.
That's correct. Right? I'm within they moved on the Rocky River. They built on the edge of the Rocky River, and I'm within about 2 to 3 miles. I'm in Mecklenburg, but I'm just across the border into Cabarrus. So I'm within about 2 miles of where the original land was.
And you've got 35 ancestors that you have identified that you are a direct descendant of, that served in the American Revolution. That's incredible.
Yes, and I'm working on trying to get them all verified, but I've got the easy ones so far. Now it's a little bit harder because a lot of the information, like on several of them, the courthouses were burned, because you'll find a lot of things. A lot of the buildings were burned because they were dealing with, live fire, candle lights and all that. So there was a lot of that, and so it's making it a little bit more of a challenge. But I know I've got their military records, but trying to tie it to the family makes it a challenge.
Right. So tell us about that history from James Bradford, starting there with that original descendant. Tell us about him.
Yeah, what they did once David and Mary moved down, and then James got here. Then James, he had a son. His name was John, and he settled at another part of the land, which put him about 1.5 miles from me. That's how I ended up, and he done very well. And then he had a son that was Charles Wilson Bradford, and Charles, he passed away when he was about 11 years old. He would have been he had 3 brothers. He had 2 brothers and 3 first cousins that served in the 20th North Carolina. They were all out of Popper Tent Church.
You got
And
these
now,
ancestors, and I see Alexander, that name popping up. That is a
yeah,
big name
well,
in this
and
part
that's
of the
where,
world.
right. Well, what goes back is my grandfather, Cecil DeWitt Bradford Sr. He married my my grandmother. Her name was Loma Alexander, and she was that was the connection to the Alexanders.
Mm-hmm.
And what was interesting, growing up as a young boy, I was always interested in the family, and so I asked my grandmother um, about her parents, and she said, "Yeah, my mother's name was Ida Alexander, and of course my father's name was Mark Alexander." And I said, "Well, grandmother," I said, "that's well, wait a minute. You mean her name was Alexander?" And I said, "How'd that happen?" My grandma said, "Oh, there's nothing to that. That just happened to be." Well, she didn't want to explain the fact. She thought they were first cousins. And she was not going to go there with me on that. But anyway, but as I went through the lineage later on in life, I realized that they were really second cousins. And the way it happened, Ida, my great grandmother, her father was Silas Senior, and Silas Junior, and his father was Silas Senior, that was married, that was the son of Hezekiah Alexander.
So tell us about Hezekiah.
All right, Hezekiah Alexander. Also, the Alexanders moved down here in the early 1750s to 60s.
Right.
Matter of fact, Hezekiah was a lot like James. His father was also named James Alexander. But however, James did not. He was up in years, his father, so he did not travel. But Hezekiah and John McNitt, his brother, they came down the Great Wagon Road, and they moved here to Mecklenburg County, and they settled more in the Eastway Drive section of town,
on the east side of town.
Yeah, and they went to Sugar Creek Presbyterian Church.
Okay.
Because you got to remember there were 7 churches in Mecklenburg, Anson County, and they were called the Seven Sisters.
Right. And Hezekiah's house is still standing.
And Hezekiah's house, he built a stone house, and it is there today, and it is the oldest standing house in Mecklenburg County.
And for those that don't know, how could people go visit that house?
If you look up the Charlotte Museum, that is the location of the Hezekiah Alexander house.
The Charlotte Museum of History. Yeah.
Yep. And that's built on that site, and you can go and tour the house and see all that. So
well, tell us about those two. What significance did they have during the Revolution and the events leading up to it?
Whenever they came, they came down. Both of them they got involved. Matter of fact, Hezekiah was a blacksmith by trade, but they had been educated, which that was the key, because most of these people were not educated. Most of them, but they had, when they were in, came down from Cecil County, Maryland.
Mm-hmm.
That's where they came from.
Okay.
They were on the in the Susquehanna River.
Okay.
That's where they were, and they moved down, which James stayed up. And his brother John McNitt, they were both really active in the political scene and working at that time with the British, because they were involved in a lot of the things, like they were trying to get a college here in Mecklenburg where they could get educate a lot of these young people that were coming up. And that was a lot of instrumental in, like, calling it Charlotte. They were trying to get favoritism from the king, they got Queen
Yeah.
Charlotte, and
Yeah. King
and
George III's wife's name.
right, and then
That's right.
they also named the college Queen's College.
Yep.
Trying to get accreditation. But anyway, they were all involved in that. However, but then Hezekiah. But then, whenever the revolution, things started coming, having their problems, Hezekiah and them decided we needed to, which the Scotch hours, you got to, when you go back to look at the Scotch hours, uh, they started out in England, and I mean in Scotland, and then England came and imposed their rule on Scotland. That was Braveheart. They left there and went to Northern Ireland, which a lot of people don't understand. They
Right.
just they didn't intermarry with the Irish. They just took a northern part of the thing and lived together. So the English decided they wanted that. Then they left and came to America.
Right.
So then they got there. Then when the English started imposing their rule and all there in Pennsylvania and Maryland, they came down the wagon road to Mecklenburg, and I guess they decided, okay, we've had enough. We're not moving anymore. The significance to them were they got very heavily involved in the revolution and trying to and because Mecklenburg was ready to, they were done with the English, and what prompted it, and I think, and it affected all these younger people because even, Hezekiah and them at that time were middle aged or whatever. But what I think really prompted and got all these people in Mecklenburg wound up was was everybody talked about the Stamp Act and, the tax on tea and all that. But what really upset, and I'm sure Hezekiah and them really upset them, was the fact that the King of England said that if you're not married in the Church of England, then your marriage is null and void. And what that meant was that all these Scotch Irish here in Mecklenburg County were all married in Presbyterian churches. So by the king making that a mandate, that meant that none of them were married. And back then, in order for you to inherit land, your parents had to be legally married.
Oh, how about that?
So that's what really fueled the fire. And I think that's what led to them declaring the independence from England, because all of a sudden, all these young men were not married and they couldn't inherit any land. So
And the straw that broke the camel's back was Lexington and Concord, right? In April of 1775. It took a couple of weeks of that to get down, the news to get down to Charlotte. Take us through that story in May of 1775.
Yeah. And that brought about 1775. And like I said, but that's what really lit them up was, I think, that really, really got them all upset was that.
Tell us about what happened on May 20th, 1775, that Hezekiah and John McNitt were both part of.
Yeah, that was the signing of the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence, where they, decided to get that Mecklenburg County was going to succeed from England and declare their independence. And where they did, John McNitt was the secretary and all, and they met at his home place, which is Alexandriana, which is better than about 2.5, 3 miles of where I live now. And it's just right there off of 115 near North Mecklenburg. Matter of fact, there's a church there, and it's called Independence Hill.
How about that? So that's very close to 485, the interstate,
yes, it's
and 115.
all close
right
to within probably a couple thousand feet of right beside the Amazon building.
Yeah. But, can folks visit that site?
Huh?
Can folks visit that site?
Yes, and it is. And matter of fact, there is a monument there that the DAR set back in the early 60s that my dad set it with a crane and commemorating the mech deck.
How
And
about that?
there's a monument there. And yes, you can drive up there and you can walk down and see the home place and all has long been gone, but the but there is a park there that you can park and go see it. And but yeah, that's where it was. The mech was signed right there.
Tell us about some of these other Patriots here. You got a great list. James Bradford, he
Yeah,
was at where was he?
yeah. All right, which one did you ask me?
James Bradford.
Yeah, and James, which
That's the namesake.
He was the son of David and Mary,
right?
And James, James and fortunately, I was able to find out a lot about James because he did fill out a pension.
Yeah,
and that's where it really helps if you're trying to get into the revolution. And it's very, very nice that they have went back in 1844. The United States decided to pay all the people that had 6 months of service in the revolution. They would get a pension, and I think it was something like 20,000 that are thereabouts. And so we have all those pension records. So, and that's
and a local guy in Charlotte, Bill Graves, transcribed hundreds and hundreds of those. Right, probably still doing it.
Yes, they're still doing it, and
amazing.
They went through and rewrote this, transcribed it, and rewrote it to where you can read it up. But
that's how I found my own ancestor, is through that same database.
Okay, so
and qualified to join the SAR.
And you know where he fought, what battles he was in,
that's
because
exactly
they had to verify, so they had to list it, and that's what I've got on James, and that's how I was able to go and see all the battles that he fought in and where he was. And
what was he in?
Well, he was in the local militia, and of course, whenever what they did, and that's why I ended up with so many ancestors in this thing, is because when they were what people don't understand, they weren't actually fighting the British Army. They were fighting the Loyalists, the Tories.
It was
Most
a civil
of the
war.
battles here that James was in at the start was fighting the Tories, which and so he said he first volunteered. What I thought was interesting in his pension, he volunteered the first time, and that's they went down to South Carolina. He called it Moore's Creek, but I still haven't been able to figure out exactly where that was. But it was a little. So the Tories had a group at Moore's Creek, South Carolina, and he went down there, and it's sort of iffy on that. I haven't been able to find out what he did. But then after he came back, then he got with Ruffleton, and they went to Ramseur's Mill. Now, at the Battle of Ramseur's Mill.
And that's over in the Lincolnton, North Carolina area.
County, yes.
And as I understand
over
it,
there.
So the British had taken Charleston by that time in roughly May of 1780. And then this happened in June of 1780, I believe. And it was a group of loyalists that were gathering to come down and join with the British in Charleston and stir up some trouble.
Yeah, because that's what they were all worried about, was if the British Army got up here and all these loyalists got together, they knew there was no way they would be able to defeat them. So that's why they were attacking the loyalists before the British Army could get to this area.
And they were quite successful, right, at Ramseur's Mill.
And they did win. Yeah, they did win at Ramseur's Mill. Now, James didn't actually get to fight in the battle because they started the battle a little early, and and Rutherford and them were marching in there, and they heard the shooting and all, but they hadn't got to so they didn't get there till after it was over with.
Better
But
late than
anyway,
never.
James was with them, and
So
but
where else was he? He was at
he
Camden?
left there, and they marched up and crossed over the Catawba and went down the other side, and met Gates at Camden, South Carolina.
So this is the hero of Saratoga that came down and took over the Southern Department and tried to defeat the British Army that had moved up from Charleston into Camden. Didn't go so
into
well.
Camden, and they were not prepared. And James said he marched down. I thought it was interesting. He said he marched down and ran back, and but his commander and all that were killed, and he got back. He was able to get away. Now I don't know if he was sick, but I do know that a lot of the troops that went down there, they were starving because they had marched down and they really weren't prepared to move an army as that size and had the supplies. And they found a bunch of apple trees and they had green apples and they ate it.
Yeah.
And supposedly a lot of them were sick on the day of the battle.
Oh yeah.
So it's.
I heard that about corn as well, that they ate some raw corn.
Is that right? Corn.
And just
yeah,
doesn't sound good.
So anyway, James left that, and he came back, and see each time he got back, since he was part of the Minutemen, the militia, he went home, worked the farm.
Yep.
And then he would get called back, and then his third tour. Well, he said they had to draft him from then on. He didn't volunteer. He said after Camden, but he went in place of another person, and went to. That's how there's a monument there on Providence Road, and Bill Anderson was instrumental in getting that monument.
That was our guest in episode 1.
Yeah,
talked about finding that camp.
Well, he used James's pension to verify that there was a campsite at 6 Mile Creek. And that because James talked about that and saying that he was there at 6 Mile Creek. Now, how he got there was that one of their neighbors asked him would he go serve in his place. And I'm sure it was probably there was some debt that was paid or whatever.
Okay.
So James went in place of his neighbor.
How about that?
That's in his record that he took somebody else's place.
And that's where Nathaniel Greene took over the army?
Yeah, and that's where Greene took over. And another interesting thing, and I'm going to do a little more digging on that, is at Popper Tent, there was a Captain Alexander, Stephen Alexander, and I'm sure he's connected to I haven't been able to go back and look at that, but I'm sure he's connected to Hezekiah Alexander because they're all kin.
Right.
Because I've already traced that back to one person in Maryland. But but anyway, James served with him every time he was with Stephen Alexander. So that's and I'm gonna do something to see if I can't get his grave marked because he's at Popper Tent, but his grave's not marked. But anyway, so he came back, and then when he got with Stephen again, and that's whenever they went to Guilford Courthouse.
How about that? Guilford Courthouse, and that's where that would have been in March of 1781, the kind of the culminating battle in the Southern Theater that was a defeat technically, but the British and Cornwallis lost so many troops that he ultimately had to retreat back to Yorktown, and we know the history from there. So other patriots, Robert Sloan. Tell us about Robert.
Okay, Robert Sloan. He was buried at Raymer. He was in a little place called Sloanville, which is just within a half a mile of my house. and what that was where all the Sloans in the 17. I think he was born in the I think 1740 or 50. They got here very early, and matter of fact, Raymer Presbyterian Church was a property that was owned by the Sloan. And that is at the intersection of Raymer Church Road and 73. All that whole area was Sloanville.
And for our fellow friends and neighbors that have moved from other places, they came down the wagon road. We call it Interstate 85 nowadays. It's not Rama Church Road; it's Rama Church Road. So we want to make
Raymer
sure
Church Road, not Rama. It's Rama. Yeah, you got to get that right.
That's right. But where did he serve?
And he served. He was at Kings Mountain.
Kings Mountain.
He was at Kings Mountain.
So this is October of 1780, after Charleston, after the big defeat at Camden, after the Battle of Charlotte, October of 1780.
Yeah, because Cornwallis was in Charlotte at that time.
That's right.
And he went over and served with them. He was at Kings Mountain.
Big giant win for the Patriots there. So a big giant army or detachment with Patrick Ferguson was there, and the Over Mountain men came from Virginia and Tennessee and parts of North Carolina, and they whooped up on the British there at Kings Mountain.
Yes,
a lot of people consider that the turning point of the Revolution.
Yes, and I agree, because that's whenever Cornwallis saw right quickly that things were getting hot, a little too hot for him, especially ending up there in Mecklenburg with all that, Then another one is John Parks, which he's buried at Sugar Creek Church, and he provided supplies, and he also, what they would do if they served on a jury during the Revolution, they also could use him, and that was what the DAR. That was what I was surprised, but I guess it's because that would be a record that if they had lost the war, that would be somebody they would definitely go after, as somebody that had served in a capacity of some faction. But I thought that was interesting. But the other thing was that he did provide supplies.
Yeah, and John Morrison.
And John Morrison. And matter of fact, we just did a grave marking on him back here several months ago. He was at Rocky River Presbyterian Church, another one of the Seven Sisters, which is now in Cabarrus, but at that time was in Mecklenburg. And and I'm connected to him through the Alexanders. My grandmother, she was her mother was a white, and John Morrison, the whites are connected to the Morrisons. Okay. That's the connection there, and that goes back to the Alexanders and all that. And so John Morrison was. I found out that he was an ensign, and I thought it was interesting. That's why I in a horseman company.
Not an ensign in the Navy like I served.
Yeah, right. He's an ensign in the horseman company.
In the horse, okay.
Yeah. And I was able to find out through another pension record, and this is what's so important, that was from a James Jones. James Jones is in Kentucky, and he wrote in there, and he listed all the other commanders that he was in Mecklenburg, and the ensign he had was John Morrison.
How about that?
And he was a horseman, and he said they made a raid on Pope's Mill, and then made several other raids before the British took the Mecklenburg County Courthouse. Okay, so this was all happening about when Cornwallis was coming into Charlotte, and then whenever he took Charlotte, took the courthouse, he said they retreated to South Carolina, and that's all we got.
Now talking about that, I'm skipping ahead to John Dickerson. So the British, occupied Charlotte in
Yes.
September for a couple of
Yes.
weeks, September into
Yeah.
early
Yeah.
October
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
in Charlotte of 1780.
Yeah.
They had to get supplies. Tell us about John Dickerson and what he
All
did.
right. And yeah, John Dickerson. What they were doing was Cornwallis came up here and he was running out of food.
Yep.
So they were sending out
Long way from
forage,
Charleston in Charlotte
right?
back
And they
then.
would just their supply lines were high, so these armies would have to go out and forage food and try to find it. And so they would send out a group of troops to these different farms and gather up whatever food and whatever corn or whatever I had. And so the McIntyre plantation was about 7 miles out of Charlotte, and the British had sent a detachment up there. Well, there was a group of uh, patriots that decided to do some reconciliation on the British for doing this. And so what they did, there was 13 of them, and there was 13 of them that got together, and one of them was a John and Thomas. There was two brothers. They were John and Thomas Dickerson, and I am connected again through the Whites because he married a White, and that was how I got connected back through the Whites
How about that?
and got to
And
John
what
Dickerson.
happened at the Battle of
And so
McIntyre's
what
Farm?
happened was, as they were foraging, they the British were running around trying to catch all the livestock and everything. Well, uh, one of the troops, the guys, they were in there plundering. They knocked over a bunch of beehives. Well, the dadgum bees come out and started stinging the dadgum troops.
They were not
And
happy bees.
yeah, yeah. So they were fighting the bees off. Well, the commander was standing there at the house there, and he was laughing, and they were all having a big time. They, unbeknown to them, that all these patriots were hiding in the brush next to him, waiting at the right moment. And just at the right moment, they started shooting, and they shot and killed 13 British troops,
Wow.
and a lot of it. There were several commanders that they killed, and there's a what was interesting, a Joseph Graham, who later was wounded
Yeah.
and well, almost was killed there at the Battle of Charlotte.
Right.
Uh, he was one of the ones that knew about this, and he wrote about it. And they said that it was probably the biggest one-sided victory that had ever been fought against the British. That they killed 13, and none of them were wounded or anything. And
Wow.
they did escape. They ran up Long Creek, which that was the area right there near. This is on off of Beatty's Ford Road, and Long Creek runs right in behind that. And from what I understand, because the British got bloodhounds and were trying to find them, but they ran up the creek, and that way they couldn't follow, so they were able to get away. But one of my directs, John Dickerson, was there.
How about that? How about it? And some folks associate the Battle of the Bees with the Charlotte Hornets moniker.
That's where that
And they,
came
you
about.
know, Cornwallis, you know, that
Right.
it's, you know, reportedly said this is a hornet's nest of rebellion. When he occupied Charlotte, got back down into South Carolina for the winter to get away from it. But some folks associate that Battle of the Bees with the Hornets as well. So we'll take both sides of that story.
And like you said, there was Kings Mountain and this,
Yeah.
and and he just thought, gosh, I've got them fight me every direction, and you're right, exactly. So
Tell us about William White.
okay, William White. Now William, okay, it gets back to that. Here we go again, back to what I was referring to about not being able to inherit land.
Right.
And William and his brother and 8 other very young men, I think they were in their early teens. They what had happened was they had got the taxes. Governor Tryon was taxing everybody. The king had told him,
So this is
okay, you're
before
no
the
longer.
revolution.
Yeah, this is in 1771. I'm sorry.
Okay.
This is all in 1771
Yeah.
when the Boston Tea Party and all this is going on. Okay. Well, between the king saying that nobody was buried unless they're in the church, but they had no English church anywhere around. That was another problem. And also, they were taxing everybody. What they had in the area was what they call regulators. It's before we had militia. Now we would really list them as militia. That would have been the Minutemen. But back then they called them regulators. And what they were a group of people that if there was an attack by the Indians or if there was any lawlessness going on, these local people that came together, they would put together a group and they would go and repel like the Indians or whatever, and they were called the regulators. And they were condoned by the governor. Well, they got all upset with the governor since they were all local people. And matter of fact, from what I understand, they hung two of his tax collectors.
Mm.
So the Governor Tryon at that time, British governor, he got upset and decided to raise up an army because he didn't have a standing army. You got to understand, there was no standing army here. It was those regulators. So he decided he needed to raise up a group, an army, all right, some soldiers, and he got a commander to oversee it and to raise up an army and go and put down the regulators.
Because they were upset with taxes from the
taxes and everything
British
else,
officials that were just
it was
unscrupulous
just
and
stirring up, and he was losing control.
right.
So he figured, well, I'm gonna put them back in line. However, the problem was, is having enough weapons because you go back then it was hard to, you didn't have a standing army, so he was having to. People say, okay, I got a gun, but I don't have black powder, whatever. So at that time, Charleston was the main harbor.
Mm-hmm.
And so Governor Tryon sent to Charleston and told him, I'd like to have two wagon loads of black powder delivered to me to a place near Hillsborough where he knew the regulators were gathering there near Hillsborough. Mm-hmm. So what they did, they put them on at that time. See, they could come up the Catawba and all that out of Charleston. They could work the rivers up, and they got up to the Langford Canal area, which is that just south of Charlotte. And then when they got around it, but then once they got close to there, they couldn't get any further. So then they put it on wagons and came up and the wagon road, and they came up through Concord, and they stopped at a tavern, which was Pfeiffer's Tavern, there in present day Concord, North Carolina. And so William and 8 other young men, which there was also they called him Black Willie Alexander. He helped put together a group, and they decided that they were going to blow up that those wagon loads of black powder.
Uh-oh.
So they waited till those guys where they camped and you can go there and see the rocks where they stopped. It's right there on the edge of the road there going into Concord. You can see these big stones that Concord's got. That's where they camped. And they put their wagons and all. Then they all went to the tavern, which is about a half a mile on over there to Pfeiffer Place for less. But anyway, they weren't there. So William and those other 7 young men went over there, and they blew up those wagon loads of black powder, and they were after doing that they were known as the Cabarrus County Black Boys. But and now it's funny because they can't really tell whether they painted their faces black so that nobody would recognize them, or it was from them messing with all the black powder that they were messing with. But anyway, they got known as the Cabarrus County Black. And and they did that in 1771. Well, after it happened, uh, William and his brother, they left and went to Georgia. They had to get totally out of here.
Yeah.
Because, and um, Tryon, I think, hung to it. He got the other boys and they turned state's evidence, but I think he did hang two of the boys. But then John Morrison, that I referred to earlier, went to defense of those young men, and he helped get them, the other kids, off because they were all out of that Rocky River and Church area. They were all at the Rocky River Church area, and he was able to get them out. But William and his brother, they stayed in Georgia till the war started, and then they came back. And so
yeah, you just have your family has so much history. I see there are several more here that with the Continental Line, more at Kings Mountain. You have just got a ton of history that I know your family is proud of, and it just gives you so much.
Like John Peacock Sr. Because most of them, a lot of them were in the militia, but John Peacock Sr. and Jr. were both in the North Carolina Continental Line. Now, they were out of eastern North Carolina, out of Dublin County, but they were both in it. And Senior, I do have that record that he was at Valley Forge. I've got the record that he was sick at Valley Forge.
How about that?
But then him and his son both, and I don't know if his son was at Valley Forge or not, but I know that they were both in the 2nd and the 10th North Carolina Continental Line.
I have a ancestor that was in the 10th, Matthew McCauley. So they probably knew each other. How about that?
They probably did, and they ended up at the Battle of Mammoth.
How about that? Monmouth Courthouse?
No, they're in New Jersey. Mammoth.
Yeah, how about that? Trying to defend Philadelphia. Yeah, how about that, man?
Yeah.
Well, Dee, you are a great American, my friend. I am so grateful for your time and sharing some of your family history here. We're gonna get this out and hopefully people will get into it and learn about history of folks that have lived in this area for a long time and these incredible patriots that sacrificed so much for what we have today. So we are grateful to you and your family and for your membership, longstanding in the Sons of the American Revolution, and wish you a great evening. And we thank our viewers. So have a great evening. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, buddy. Take care.
All right, man.
All right.